Our last chapter, or rather our last part of chapter 7 this week, is a discussion of stalking, which is a particular area, again, that is only recently regulated. I think within the last 20 years, perhaps, that we began to see laws against stalking. And before the close of this section, also we'll spend a little bit of time looking at some factors associated with special populations in the area of dating violence and sexual assault. The first anti-stalking laws were passed in California in 1990, but within 10 years after that, all 50 states had laws limiting or prohibiting stalking behaviors. When a victim-offender relationship is or was intimate, stalking should be considered a form of intimate partner violence. So there are different types of situations in which stalking occurs, and stalking does occur outside of the intimate relationship, but we're here in this particular discussion, we're really focused more upon stalking within the context of an intimate relationship. And this is a kind of an area. First, let's talk about the definition of stalking. Stalking is a pattern of repeated and unwanted attention, harassment, contact, that should be, or any course of conduct directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to feel fear. This is the definition of stalking from the Office for Victims of Crime in 2002. This also can extend to cyberstalking, which involves the use of electronic communication in different ways to trouble the individual, whether it be to hack into their email accounts or to monitor their account using their identity falsely in electronic settings, disrupting their lives with different kinds of things electronically, those kinds of things. So when we talk about stalking, though, we define stalking. This whole definition is evolving, and one of the things that has to be done is to, I think, separate between what the text refers to as courtship persistence versus stalking behaviors. And it is not unusual when an intimate relationship or a dating relationship ends that the partner that is not the person who ended the relationship might continue to follow the person to try to win her back or win him back for a period of time. That's not an unusual thing, and that isn't necessarily stalking. I think about a movie. Some of you may have seen this, and if you haven't, I would really recommend it. If you can deal with subtitles, it's really a great love story. It's called Cinema Paradiso. And I think it's a film out of Italy from about, 10 or 15 years ago. It won different awards, but this is a story about a movie producer in Italy who, long story short, he just goes back to his hometown and kind of recalls his childhood and his adolescence and everything. And one of the pieces of this is remembering his first deep love affair, the first time he really fell deeply in love with a young woman. And at one point in this story, and he is just so smitten by this woman, he tells her that he's going to, I think, stand outside her window and wait for a sign on New Year's Eve if she loves him. And there's a scene, it's pouring down rain, and he is down the street and looking up at her bedroom window, and he can see some movement in her room, but the dormers or the shutters are closed so that he can't see into it, and he stands there in the pouring rain waiting for her to open the windows to give him some sign that she's interested in him, and it just never comes, and he stands there all night long, and you just feel so sorry for him. It's just he's so deeply in love and everything. Now, in this definition, would we call that stalking behavior? Perhaps. I suppose the difference in this particular behavior is that what he was doing probably isn't something that would generate fear, although if he had some psychological problems, and we don't know that for a fact, it might have in that case. But this is the kind of thing that's probably more considered to be courtship persistence. But there is a need to define the differences between the two when you talk about stalking. And the consequences of stalking really are much more serious than I think the general public recognizes. The effects of this can go on for years and years and years, where the victim doesn't feel safe any longer, might have to move, quit their work, change their phone number, change their email address, and change schools, all those kinds of things. And you can imagine the kind of problems associated with that in this day and age. And prosecution is really fairly ineffective, like the funnel we had talked about earlier, where you have a large number of offenses, and by the time it gets down to where penalties are actually being applied, there's a very small number of cases where that actually happens. So it's sort of that funnel shape, and the funnel in prosecution certainly applies here in stalking as well. The traits of individuals who engage in stalking would not be too surprising to you. This is individuals with attachment or dependency issues, feelings a lot of jealousy. This is that insecure attachment, that deficiency-based love we were talking about again. Sometimes stalkers have personality disorders or mental illnesses and of different kinds of things, where they don't consider the feelings of others, or they only consider their own feelings, those types of things. Some stalkers are simple criminals, and criminals can be violent. Criminals, and it is to say that stalkers sometimes can become dangerous with the so to speak the wrong individual committing this offense. And there are different kinds of typologies for identifying stalkers that are mentioned in the textbook. Some of them are older than others. But one of the more recent ones, I think, takes a look at the relationship of the stalker to the victim, and also the context of the stalking, and it comes up with 4 different categories that they call intimate, acquaintance, public figure, and private stranger. So you can read more about that in the text if you're interested more in those kinds of things. And stalking might be explained by that insecure attachment we talked about, a tendency to be emotionally dependent upon others, and perhaps could be courtship persistence, but again taken further than typical courtship persistence, I think. Need to control the victim. All those kinds of factors may also have a role to play in this issue. And there are studies that indicate that harsh discipline in childhood and that anxious attachment that develop from abusive relationships with parents oftentimes are associated with stalkers in adulthood. Victims of stalking are best advised to document all their infractions, keep diaries. I think the textbook says, keep all those letters and emails or whatever it might be, put them somewhere in case you need them for prosecution purposes. And the urge may be to kind of destroy them and get them out of there, but if it continues, having those things is one way to demonstrate what's going on, and the courts can be more effective in assisting the victim in those situations. But there's also studies that indicate that restraining orders are only effective at 40% of the time, and I don't think this is just for stalking. I think these are restraining orders in general. This is a tool that victims have to have the court intervene and prevent contact with an individual who is assaulting or stalking them. But a lot of times the individuals who perpetrate these crimes really are overwhelmed with other things and aren't too worried about what the courts say, and so restraining orders have a limited effectiveness in the end. College campuses need to be aware of the existence of stalking, recognize it as a real problem, and implement policies about the behavior. And the criminal justice system, those interventions may decrease the amount of stalking, but again, there needs to be efforts geared towards finding ways for it to increase its effectiveness there. Legislation, for instance, should get away from this notion of incident-driven things. Well, what happened in this particular incident, and is that something that represents stalking or not? And look at the larger pattern of behavior, because it isn't the troubling aspects of the incidents really rest much more in the pattern of those incidents, not just one incident alone. Anti-stalking legislation that would include things like provisions for lifetime restraining orders, programs that would not allow stalkers out of jail on bail. A lot of times these guys can can bail out and go right back on the streets, and even with a restraining order, will go back to their behaviors. Addressing cyber stalking and finding effective ways to stop that. Employers need to be sensitive to this, and a lot of times victims their victimization kind of intrudes upon the business and the work side, and employers just kind of expect them to deal with this and keep him away from there. Of course, she can't do that necessarily, or he can't do that necessarily, and so employers sometimes could help by establishing more effective kinds of and understanding kinds of policies towards the victims and assist them in dealing with this more effectively. When you look at the topic of stalking, as well as sexual assault and dating violence, and kind of look at it in the context of same-sex relationships, there's some discussion about this in the textbook, and I have to say that I'm a little disappointed with the way that the discussion of same-sex relationships is handled in this particular chapter, because there isn't a lot of discussion about this for that population. What they do say, though, is they focus some upon some studies that indicate that bisexual males, rather than gay males or heterosexual males, the bisexual males are at a greater risk of dating violence victimization than either gay males or lesbians are. They tend to experience negative reactions to any disclosures of a sexual assault. Now that is true for virtually any population in one way or another, but in this particular population, the negative reactions tend to be amplified and perhaps emphasized. So turning to counselors tends to be of use and help for these individuals. Romantic partners tend not to be helpful so much and tend to be upset and blaming, those kinds of things, and so sometimes turning to counselors is the best approach for bisexual males in these situations, at least. They don't get much help from police, according to most of the studies. The impact on how laws are executed by police and others in the system really have a much larger role to play on how effective those laws are. So again, how do police respond, and do they treat the assaults or the stalking, the victimization, as seriously for individuals in bisexual relationships as they might in a marital relationship? Those kinds of questions are things that impact the effectiveness of any legal intervention. There may be a perception that, and this would extend to dating relationships as well, that these factors or these issues may be less serious because the individual is more or less free to walk away from the relationship, and not that they're not free to walk away from a marriage either, but that it's less complicated legally to do that. And that, of course, doesn't recognize all of the emotional factors that exist in those relationships. That it's not one you just turn and walk away from and turn the page and move on. And also, again, university education and prevention programs for victims of sexual assault need to make it available to victims of same-sex assault as well. The text spends some time looking at cross-cultural factors, and there's some tables and charts involving different ethnic populations and issues within those populations that I find probably less than informative as it could be. The way the information is presented, I think, is just not really easy to use. But there are a few, I think, general things that we can pull out of this discussion that might be of some use. And one is the statements about cultures in the text, that they can be clannish, sometimes even vindictive about negative extrafamilial exposure, favoring stability of the family over protection from harm. So essentially this says that sometimes when individuals are assaulted or troubled in their relationships, their intimate relationships outside the family system, many cultures discourage that being brought to the family or being taken to authorities at all. And so intervention sometimes can be very difficult in cross-cultural situations sometimes. The study suggests that victims in other cultures may be less likely to inform their family if they experience dating violence or sexual assault. One particular type of problem that we see sometimes in other societies, and they're called honor societies here. There are societies that believe that the honor of the family rests on the public behavior of the women in the family, the wives, the daughters, those types of things. And so because of that vital importance, men are invested with the authority to discipline and even kill women for almost any offense that they consider dishonorable. And these are stories that you may have heard about from time to time, and sometimes it's even portrayed in, some of the popular TV shows like Law and Order and those kinds of things. There were honor killings in a few of those episodes, but these are real things that happen around the world that we sometimes in America, where we struggle for things like equal pay for women and deal with issues about the second shift, women having all those extra duties at home when they come home after work and those kinds of things. We lose sight of the fact that in other cultures, women have no identity of their own and that they are possessions. And so these honor societies don't necessarily condone violence against women, but they accept the belief that men are less culpable, less responsible for partner abuse when it occurs because of jealousy and because of the behaviors of the females in the family. And also a lot of these cultures encourage and feel more positively about women who stay with abusive husbands despite the problems that are there. And so as we encounter those clients in our work, even in American society, these are some issues that this is just the very tip of the iceberg that is worth being aware of and learning more about. Ethnicity also figures into some of these particular issues. There are some studies that say that some racial groups, I think they mentioned the Hispanics in particular, but some ethnic groups are less likely to report the more serious crimes, according to a 2007 study. And this is brought up, I think, in this context because of the fact that minorities often live in, just because of socioeconomic realities, oftentimes live in neighborhoods that are more crime prone and that type of thing. It's said that intimate partner violence is more likely to be perpetrated among individuals who witness community violence, who have a male social support network that encourage violence, and a female social support network which encourages or accepts victimization, that discourages reporting out and leaving relationships. Sometimes male peers actively encourage male to female intimate partner violence, and many victims in the female social network, it says here, normalized experience of intimate partner violence as well as something that they must live with, and this is sort of their cross to bear, so to speak. Finally, again, we touch on alcohol and drug consumption in relation to these issues. And as we close this topic, again, I suppose it can't be said enough that research shows that a significant correlation between both perpetration and victimization of dating violence or sexual assault, a significant correlation, both of those areas, with alcohol and drug consumption. Resistance strategies research show that women who have been assaulted previously have more difficulty resisting a rape than a non-assaulted woman. And alcohol consumption in any situation is more likely to impair a woman's resistance strategy. There was one study that's mentioned in the text about Icelandic youth and using alcohol as a coping strategy for stress and other emotional issues. And this is something that's not surprising, I suppose. I think a lot of people believe that there's a lot of people that drink out there to cope with social situations, to cope with insecurities, to medicate their unhappiness or whatever that might be. And so one suggestion is that teaching specific problem-oriented ways of coping might reduce alcohol consumption and levels of depression. And I suppose the implication of this is then that that would make these individuals less prone to dating violence and sexual assault. So that really concludes this particular discussion about stalking and the special issues related to dating violence and sexual assault, and this also ends the discussion in this chapter. If any questions remain, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll join you again next week. Bye for now.